This is a line of code in the most popular programming language in the entire world. You're probably looking at this and thinking, this doesn't make any sense. If we run this, it'll surely break. But that's not what happens. When we run it, we see something that's not only strange, but is extraordinary. Every year, Stack Overflow does a survey of their community. They gather a bunch of interesting insights from tools that developers use to the state of developers' mental health. They also ask what language developers are using in their day-to-day work, and for the last 9 years, one language has topped that list. The same language we're talking about in this video, JavaScript. It's no secret that JavaScript is massive. 97% of websites use it, and with technologies like Node, Electron, and React Native being developed, you can write almost anything in JavaScript. JavaScript developers are earning $110,000 a year on average, and JavaScript experts can see well over $500K annually, and some even reaching into that 7-figure range. But despite all of that, despite JavaScript's massive popularity, if you've spent any time on a programming forum such as Programming Humor on Reddit, you'll notice that JavaScript gets made fun of a lot. But why? Why would a language that's so popular get dunked on so often by the greater community? Part of it is just the natural flack that anything that's popular will get. But the main reason is that JavaScript is really weird, and to understand why, we need to go back to the origins of not just JavaScript, but the internet itself. In 1993, a company called Netscape released the first web browser, Mosaic. The idea was that individual computers, we'll call it the client, could ask for some file from another computer, which we'll call the server. That file would contain some markup to tell the browser what to show the user. That markup was HTML. This set the foundations for the internet, but there was a problem. Only serving HTML meant that users were only able to see static content. There was a massive demand among early web developers to have the ability to create dynamic content that would change while the user's viewing it. So when Netscape was working on their next browser, they decided to add a scripting language to it. They originally wanted to embed Java in the browser, but the management changed their mind and tasked Brandon Ike with creating a whole new language. The new language would be called JavaScript, mainly as a marketing ploy to attract developers to it, since Java was the #1 language at the time. Even though outside of some vague syntactical similarities between the two, they couldn't be more different. Ike was tasked with creating a new language. That's a big task. Think about what you would do if you were in his shoes. You need a new language for people to develop web content. What kind of things would you prioritize? Ike decided to prioritize making JavaScript easy to pick up and to allow developers to prototype quickly. In order to do this, he made a pretty big decision, a decision that would eventually lead to the madness we saw at the start of this video. JavaScript would be weakly typed. When we say a language is weakly typed, what we mean is that variables don't have to retain their typings, and types can easily be coerced together. So, for example, say you add some text, a string, and a number together. In some languages, this would cause an error, but in JavaScript, it'll infer that you probably want to combine these into one piece of text, like so. Think about how a system like this would need to be implemented. You'd have to design a series of rules for how each data type interacts with each other, and how they interact with different language operations. Some of these are fairly obvious, like what do you do when you add a number together with a string? But others get strange. What happens when you use the addition operator on two objects? NaN means not a number. It's a special keyword that is output by doing numerical operations on non-numerical data types. What's strange about NaN is when we look at the underlying type, it's a number. Since NaN is a number under the hood, if we add it to a string, it'll behave like any other number would in JavaScript, and we get the string NaN. Let's look at some other weird examples. What happens when you add a string to an array? Well, JavaScript coerces the array to a string. Okay, but what happens if we add a number to an array? Interestingly, this also gets coerced to a string. One more example. What happens when we do just addition on an empty array? We get 0. Now let's add a not Boolean operator and another addition sign, and look, we get 1. This isn't actually that strange when you think about it. We know already that a plus an empty array gives you 0. And if you do not 0, we get true. And if you do an addition operator on true, it gets coerced to 1. So hear me out. What if we combine all of these weird things together and see what we get? We start by getting nan, then we coerce it to a string. Then we get the second letter, and boom, we get the letter A. You can actually produce every single character this way. And because of that, you can run anything in JavaScript just using these characters. Look, someone even released the entirety of jQuery, but only using these 6 characters. Isn't that neat? When we look back at the code at the start of this video, hopefully it looks less like a mystery now. It shows us a story about JavaScript's founding fathers trying to make a dynamic interpreted language, and shows us the pitfalls that happen as a result of that. Funny little language quirks like these are fun to learn about, but they can also teach us a lot about how the language is working and the trade-offs that happen when you design a system as complex as a new language. JavaScript might get a lot of flack for quirks like these, but to me, I've always found things like these not just interesting, but also kind of beautiful. I think there's something inside every developer that makes them want to take something and push it to its absolute limits. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So next time you see some strange oddity with a language or technology, don't run away from it. Follow that curiosity and you might learn something truly special. Thank you for watching this video. It honestly took me a lot more work than my usual content, so if you enjoyed it, be sure to let me know down below.